Idea Ignited, Part 2, An It's Possible story. Flint had been awake most of the night thinking how this bizarre idea might work, and only went to bed for a couple of hours when the first hint of sun started showing in the sky. He sent the first text just before breakfast. I know I already opened a can of worms, but here comes a boatload of them. Or maybe I'm opening Pandora's sparkly gay box. Either way, you should probably take a deep breath before reading my next message. They each sensed from it something bigger than shared grocery funds or a coordinated dinner schedule. Miguel saw it first, still in bed, and replied immediately, I like worms, very excited. Tim saw it at the nursery between tasks, read it twice, and let it settle. Victor saw it at his desk and stared at it for several minutes. Nick wasn't entirely shocked when he saw it on his way to work. He'd sensed Flint's original proposal might connect to more than just intentional community. He put his phone in his pocket, then took it out and read it again. All morning, Flint had been thinking about what the next message should say. In the middle of what felt like the 20th draft of the text, his twin sister Fiona called from Kansas. She had a way of knowing when his brain was in overdrive. At first he avoided mentioning what he was thinking about, but she soon got it out of him. At first she laughed, so he was surprised how normally she treated the idea, almost like she expected it. She advised him, don't force anything, let it come from your heart. Then wished him luck as she said goodbye. With that in mind, he rewrote the last message one more time and then he sent it. He knew it wasn't perfect, but he hoped it conveyed everything that he felt. He wrote about texting with Tim the night before, how the word quintuple appeared almost as a joke, and how it had landed like a key in a lock. He mentioned how much their friendship meant to him. He wrote carefully about Nick, promising that this was not like his former throuple. He wrote about Victor, and about not wanting to impose on what he knew was Victor's, the house, the relationship, the life he'd built there. And then he mentioned the joke about being the house's boyfriend. He didn't want to be the house's boyfriend, he wanted to be their boyfriend. The replies came in over the rest of the day. Victor wrote, just to clarify, are you suggesting being a boyfriend to each of us separately, or like we'd all be boyfriends with each other? Miguel messaged, I was confused about that too. But if Flint gets to be everyone's boyfriend, I should be too. It's only fair. Flint replied, sorry about the confusion. I'm running on very little sleep. I'm suggesting we could all be boyfriends with each other. Like some kind of a group relationship, I guess. I know it sounds weird, but I think there might be something to it. Tim sent 5 brain emojis and 5 anatomical heart emojis, which felt accurate and appropriate. Nick saw the texts at lunch. He only ate half his sandwich, then took a walk outside and texted his roommate Nichelle as he went back to work. I need to chat with you tonight. She was waiting in the kitchen when he got home that evening. She'd been in Washington, D.C. doing an internship when Nick's throuple had fallen apart, following the wreckage from a distance through phone calls and texts that couldn't quite reach the way she wanted to reach. She'd been back in Chattanooga for the aftermath, though. She'd watched it up close. She saw his struggle and the effort he put in to come back a stronger, better man. So now, when Nick told her about Flint's message from that morning, she immediately became defensive, exclaiming, you can't actually be considering this. Nick replied, I don't know what to say about it yet. It's a lot. But these guys, we aren't just a casual group of friends. I can't just brush it aside. Nichelle pushed back. Yes, you can. Just because they've been good to you doesn't mean this is good for you. What you and Victor have now is real. That's worth protecting. This polyamory thing, it's crazy. Nick held his ground. It's not the same situation as before. Nichelle challenged him. How is this different? Nick took a moment, then answered. Well, 5 guys versus 3 is one obvious thing, but more than that, I'm not the same person. When my ex suggested the throuple, I went along with it because I was afraid. Afraid of losing him, afraid of being alone. I'm not afraid of those things anymore. Plus, Victor is someone I trust, and I know and care for each of the guys. They've been there for me. That relationship 2 years ago was very different. Nichelle looked at him for a long moment. She saw he was speaking his truth, not just trying to convince himself. She relented slightly. Promise me you'll be careful, and that you'll keep me in the loop. He didn't reply to that, but picked up his phone to text someone. She thought, he could be so rude sometimes. Her phone buzzed on the table a second later. She looked down. It said, you are my loop. She gave him a sly smile and shook her head, but something in her expression had shifted. Not convinced yet, but open in a way it hadn't been before. The conversations between the guys increased in intensity and happened everywhere and in every combination. Victor had questions about structure. Tim had thoughts about communication. Miguel had opinions about everything. None of them had heard of a relationship bigger than a throuple, and this wasn't like any poly relationship they had heard of. There was a lot to consider. After a couple of days that felt hectic and chaotic, Nick sent a message to the group. Let's slow down a bit, do more introspective thinking, and meet for a hike Sunday to discuss things together in person. They agreed and scheduled it for Sunday at 4:30. Friday afternoon, Miguel went to his family's home and told his mom, Miranda, about Flint's idea. She didn't know the guys well, but she had spent time at the house just a couple weeks before helping Miguel cook for Victor's birthday party. It had brought her joy to see her little Miguelito happy there with his friends. But now she was worried. She stirred something in a pot while he told her. Miranda turned from the stove and asked, all 5 of you? Miguel confirmed, all 5. Another long moment passed. Miranda pressed on. Miguel, I have never heard of such a thing. Our relationship is not a dinner party. You can't just invite everyone, and when it gets late, you can't just send them home. Miguel answered, I know, Mama. She looked at him in the way she always had, and continued. You know what I'm going to tell you next? Miguel replied. You're going to tell me to make sure everyone is serious. She confirmed. Exactamente. She turned back to the stove. She had built things from nothing more than once. She understood that sometimes the structure you need is one that doesn't exist yet. She said nothing more about it that evening, but when he was leaving, the hug lasted a little longer than usual, telling him everything he needed to know. Sunday at 4:30, they met at a trailhead on the east side of the city. April in Chattanooga was on full display, the air warm, the new leaves a bright green. Flint arrived early as usual. Victor and Nick pulled in together right on time. Miguel and Tim arrived predictably late. As Miguel got out of the car, he noticed Victor standing there with his clipboard and teased him for bringing it on a hike. Victor pointed out his clipboard had saved many people from many headaches. They knew that was true. The hike and the conversation started easy. The weather, Nichelle's hot new boyfriend, and the fact that Miguel had brought enough food to feed them all for a week. Miguel explained, I like to be ready. Flint asked, ready for an expedition across North America? Miguel shrugged. You never know. Victor tapped his pen on the clipboard and nudged them into the discussion. First point. Why? He directed the question to Flint, who had been waiting for it. Flint leaned into it. In some ways, the answer is almost as simple as the question. I like each of you. You're important parts of my life. With you guys, I've never felt like I was working to keep things going. We work well together. And there's no version of my future I want to imagine that doesn't have all of you in it. That's why the quintuple idea really hit me. Nick asked the question he needed to ask. Why does it need to be a relationship? Why can't it just stay what it's been? Tim stepped in. It could stay what it's been, but it's the same reason you and Victor didn't just stay friends last year. When you're attracted to someone, something changes when you commit. In most relationships, it's with one person. With us, we'd be committing to everyone. Different shape, same principle. They worked through Victor's list as the trail climbed. Household responsibilities, financial thoughts, dealing with confusion from people seeing a relationship that was so out of the box. There might even be resistance or hostility. Flint brought up that as a group there'd also be a lot of support, even when things get difficult or confusing. Regarding confusion, Tim mentioned as a kid most Sundays his family did a calendar coordination meeting. Nick's family had done the same thing, but called them planning parties, and there were snacks. Victor smiled and held up the clipboard to show that weekly planning meetings and quarterly/annual review was next on the list. He then wrote party/snacks next to it. He was glad they were on the same page there. They stopped at a viewpoint overlooking the Tennessee River. Miguel took his backpack off to share some snacks. Flint observed, You brought a cutting board? Miguel replied, It's just my small one. Victor looked over at him and held up the clipboard. Miguel looked at it with theatrical resignation and quipped, But it's still bigger than yours. Victor rolled his eyes and replied, Maybe on a bad day. Moving on. Commitment. Miguel piped up, How far down the list is the sexy stuff? Victor replied, Number 7, after commitment. Miguel pressed on, Maybe we could discuss it now. Victor held firm. Number 6, commitment. Number 7, intimacy. We'll get to it, Miguel. Victor had clear opinions on commitment and stated them plainly. He and Nick had discussed it at length, and for both of them, a committed relationship wasn't a preference, it was a foundation. Nick added, I've had experience with what outside variables do to a group dynamic. I'd rather build something that doesn't have that pressure on it. They all agreed to that. Flint spoke thoughtfully that with intimacy, they had to accept that they wouldn't all feel the same way about each other at the same time. So consent wasn't a one-time thing. It needed to be ongoing. Tim weighed in. I think jealousy is real and inevitable. We need to get comfortable naming it early before it becomes something larger. Each of them had seen jealousy ruin relationships. Miguel jumped in, teasing at first. Yes, and anything can be a source of jealousy. Like how you're all jealous of how well I cook, and many other things about me. But we need to accept reality because we're different people who want different things at different times. We have to communicate clearly and honestly. We can't be sad little horny boys who cry when we don't get our way. A brief, appreciative silence settled over the trail. Tim noted, I was going to make essentially that same point, just with different phrasing. Miguel grinned. I know, that's why I said it first. Nick pointed out, That's insightful for someone who has never had a boyfriend. Miguel replied, Which means I have none of the bad habits. You're welcome. As they started back down the trail, Victor raised the next point, that most couples transition into each other's lives gradually. But since most of them were already housemates, and if they move forward with the idea, they'd be skipping a lot of that, and would need to be ready for the difference between being housemates and being romantic partners. Miguel laughed and pointed out, lesbians will be jealous of us that we moved in with each other even before the first date. This motivated some silly chatter. Flint recognized they'd had enough serious discussion. Victor agreeingly put the list away for now, and they just enjoyed the rest of the hike and the time together. The days after the hike moved at the pace of people being careful with something they didn't want to break. Too careful, Tim decided. He pulled Flint aside one evening and shared his observation that the group had been so busy deliberating they'd forgotten to actually be with each other. All the conversations were about problems and risks. They weren't acting like people who were genuinely drawn to each other. Tim put it plainly. We need to tip the balance. Make sure the warmth is present alongside the caution. Make sure the potential is felt, not just analyzed. Flint agreed immediately. They made a quiet plan. Pass along some information, sit a little closer, let the chemistry work more freely. They decided to bring Miguel in on it. Flint looked at Tim and asked, "When did you get this perceptive?" Tim answered without missing a beat. "I've always been this perceptive. I just usually keep it to myself." A few nights later, as dinner was finishing, Flint suggested they all watch some intentional community videos that Victor mentioned might be helpful. When Victor went to get his laptop, Miguel quickly crossed the room and settled into what everyone understood was Victor's designated recliner, with the decisive ease of a man executing a maneuver he had been rehearsing since breakfast. Victor looked at his chair, looked at Miguel, then looked at the two empty couches. Miguel looked back with complete innocence. Victor raised an eyebrow. "Comfortable?" Miguel beamed. "Very, thank you." Tim guided Nick to the smaller couch, and so Victor sat on the larger couch with Flint, and the videos began. By the second video, the room had quietly relaxed. Tim and Nick had settled into each other, both enjoying the unique geometry of tall and short bodies fitting together. The guys knew Nick loved to cuddle, while Victor preferred it in small doses. One issue they'd had to compromise on in their relationship. Flint's arm had moved along the back of the couch behind Victor, and Victor had let it be there. Somewhere during a video about community gardening, he found memories coming back from a couple of times, years earlier, when what had existed between him and Flint had been real, but had nowhere to go. He put his hand on Flint's knee. Tonight, it felt like it had somewhere to go. Miguel ran to the kitchen for water before the next video, and upon returning, ignored Victor's recliner entirely and sat on the big couch, putting Victor in the middle. During a quiet, scenic moment in the video, Miguel remarked to no one in particular, "Did you know that Flint was jealous of both Nick and Victor when they started dating?" Flint said without moving, "Miguel." Miguel answered calmly, "I'm just passing it along. Tim told me to." Tim clarified, "I said mention it naturally." Miguel countered, "This is naturally." Tim pointed out, "This is a documentary about a Danish co-housing project." Miguel reasoned, "I saw some houseplants. Very natural." Flint redirected, "Miguel was jealous of both of you too." Miguel didn't reply. His blush was not obvious, but it was there. Nick didn't say anything either, but in the dark of the room, with Tim's long arms still around his shoulders, he was smiling inside and out. The next evening, Victor mentioned that he'd spoken with his mom at lunch. Tim looked up and asked, "How did that go?" Victor reflected. "She asked if I was happy. I said yes. She said to figure out the rest carefully. And then she dished up seconds, which I've always understood to be her version of a blessing." Miguel noted, "Our mothers are more alike than either of them would be comfortable knowing." That night, Victor wasn't surprised when he saw a call incoming from his dad. The chat was measured and clear. 5 people together was going to get complicated, internally and externally. People would have things to say. He hoped Victor had thought about what that would cost. Victor said he had, and asked his dad to trust that he'd looked at this clearly. His dad replied, "I do trust you, just be careful." Victor promised, "I will be." After he hung up, he continued to pace around the backyard. His dad wasn't wrong about any of it, but he realized there was a difference between something that's just complicated and something that's complicated and worth it. A few days passed, warmer than the ones before. More smiles, more connection. Miguel reminded Nick of special experiences they'd shared when they were in college, before either of them were out. And Miguel mentioned Flint had similar fond memories with Nick. Tim hadn't had any experiences of that sort with the guys, but one evening, he, Flint, and Miguel were up late watching a show and ended up sharing their first kisses. The idea was starting to feel more real. Nick stopped by the house after work one evening. While waiting for Victor to get home, he chatted with Tim and Flint. It was one of those days when he wasn't feeling very sure about things. He wondered again if they couldn't just remain friends, noting how great the last year had been. He worried that the whole thing could just crash and burn. Tim acknowledged, "That's a real risk. The things have already changed. You can't unask the question. The option to keep things the same is gone. But the fact we are discussing these risks seems like evidence that things won't just fall apart." Flint leaned forward. "I've been noticing when we're all doing something together, you seem so happy. It's just when we discuss all this business, you go into a different mode. I'm not telling you what to decide, I just think it's worth noticing which version of yourself you trust more." Nick said quietly, "I don't want to make the wrong choice." Tim reflected, "I think most choices aren't about right and wrong. They're usually about what's better and what's worse. Whatever you choose, we'll be here for you." Just then, Victor got home. He and Nick took a little walk around the neighborhood. Nick mentioned what Tim and Flint had just chatted about. He asked, "If I say no to this, where does that leave us?" Victor had thought about this and didn't hesitate. "We are a team already. If you say no, I'm with you. I'd be lying if I said Flint's whole idea wasn't compelling to me, but it only interests me if you want it for yourself as well. And in case it isn't obvious, the other guys all care deeply about you too." The contrast now from 2 years ago, when his ex had suggested starting a throuple, was stark. Nick had sensed ulterior motives from the beginning of that experience. And he barely knew the other guy, his boyfriend suggested, beyond thinking he seemed cool and he was really, really good looking. He couldn't remember either of them ever asking what he thought or felt about things. Victor gave Nick a smile and went on. So whether we end up in a quintuple together or as an old-fashioned gay couple, your choice is important and respected. Nick looked at him and thought, not for the first time, that this is what it felt like to be loved carefully. Nick replied, I've been trying to distinguish what's irrational fear from what's legitimate caution. I get moments of clarity, and what I find then isn't dread. He looked at Victor. It's something closer to standing at the edge of a mysterious sea, looking at it, and not being afraid of the water. Victor observed, That's different from where you were 2 weeks ago. Nick hugged him close and admitted, It is. I just need a few more days to think a little more. Thank you for being here with me. Nick took the time he asked for. He woke up early on Saturday and went on a long ride, the contours of the trail connecting thoughts flowing not just through his head, but his whole body. After that, he met up with Nichelle for lunch. They always did their annual friend date on April 25th. And Miguel was joining them as well. The three of them had been on the university's cheerleading team together. As they chatted, she was asking different questions than before. Less, why would you do this? And more, how would this actually work? Maybe it was because Miguel was there. Maybe it was because she too had realized over the last few weeks that what Nick was considering was very different from his throuple experience. But Nick noticed her shift. After lunch, Miguel and Nichelle went shopping together, but Nick went back to the condo. He stood in front of the large windows overlooking Chattanooga as the afternoon sun poured through. The concept of interdependence from the book Victor gave him came into his mind, and he reflected how well the five of them worked together, creating something greater than the sum of its parts. He remembered how these men had helped him piece his broken life together a year and a half before. He thought about a future where he said yes versus a future where he said no. And suddenly he realized he had made the decision days, if not weeks before, and for some reason he was only now noticing it. He wasn't standing on the edge of a mysterious sea. He was already in, chest deep, and it felt great. And there was an amazing boat next to him with 4 reliable, caring crew members ready to lift him up. He grabbed his phone and called Victor. Is everyone going to be at the house tonight? Victor replied, I think so. Why? Nick answered, I realized I'm ready for the adventure. Make sure they're there and don't say anything to them. I'll be there after dinner, around 8. I'll bring dessert. Victor replied warmly, You've got it. And yes, this will be an adventure. I'm so glad we'll be on it together. Love you. See you soon. Victor could sense Nick smiling as they said goodbye. Flint's sister Fiona texted him just before dinner. I was just thinking about you. How's your big relationship idea coming along? Flint replied, As you mentioned, this isn't something that can be forced. We're taking things one step at a time. I'm feeling optimistic though. She messaged back. You can't move the stars, but I have a feeling they'll align for you. You're special and deserve a special life. Hugs and kisses. Nick drove over as the evening was settling in. The golden April light in Chattanooga made everything look like it was a painting. When he arrived, they were all still in the kitchen, Victor clearing the table, Tim and Miguel washing the dishes, Flint at the back door lubricating the hinge that had started squeaking. Nick stood in the kitchen doorway. He looked at these 4 men who had waited without pushing, who had made room for every version of his hesitation without making him feel like a problem to be solved. Nick announced with a grin, I'm on board. Let's do this. Victor turned and gave him a big hug. Miguel ran over with soapy hands, screaming a little, and smashed himself into the 2 of them. Tim smiled and immediately started rinsing and drying his hands, but before he could finish, Flint pulled him along as he crossed the kitchen to join in the embrace. Nick accused Flint of crying to deflect attention from the tears in his own eyes. Miguel declared immediately that this called for a toast. As he went to the fridge, he noticed Nick had brought dessert, as promised, a cake. He had had the bakery decorate it. In beautiful cursive, the frosting on top read, Quintuple. With joy they set sail into waters uncharted, and this was the tale of how it all started.